the industry of Holocaust appropriations. And I will also not be able to talk about Ukraine due to time constraints. So I will focus only on the issue of COVID-19. Please, Tahal, could you put the next slide? Yeah. So first of all, what is Holocaust appropriation? The term has already appeared during this conference, and it's not my term. It has been circulating in the literature for about 1 or 2 decades. My own definition of the term would be, and forgive me, I will take a hint. Deliberate adoption of either the visual or verbal language usually associated with the Nazi genocide of European Jewry outside its original context, for the purpose of promotion of one's own political or other kind of agenda. As such, it is one of the forms of Holocaust distortions, as it is defined. Okay. As it is defined by the IRA working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion. More on that in a little bit. And it is very close to the figure of speech we sometimes call in Latin reductio ad Hitlerum. This is the figure of speech in which we tend to compare our discussion opponents to Hitler in order to win a debate. I'm using specifically this term Holocaust appropriation because it rhymes with some of the terms used in the left-wing academia, for example, cultural appropriation. And this similarity may be actually useful in when trying to confront this issue. Could we please go to the next slide? Indeed, Holocaust has become a universally understood symbol of evil, to the extent that we may be tempted to invoke the language or images of the Holocaust anytime we want to say that something is not right, that something is wrong. We have seen these cases, for example, in the iconography of the vegan movements, where slaughterhouses were being compared to death camps, or on the other side, on the other slide, from the right-wing side of the political spectrum, in the pro-life movement, that means in the anti-abortion movement, where abortions were being again compared to the Holocaust. These are images from the United States, but we have that also in Czechia on the other side, on the other slide. Where we also encounter the term baby cost, which is not a Czech invention. It also comes from the West, but the intentional similarity of these terms is indeed noteworthy. On the next slide, we see these 2 images, which you have already seen yesterday in my colleague's presentation. These are the images from the pro-Palestinian iconography. On the left, a cartoon by Carlos Latouf. On the right, a cartoon from the Iranian Holocaust cartoon contest. And on the next slide, somebody, when I say industry of Holocaust appropriation, I made that intentionally because somebody might invoke the name of Norman Finkelstein, the famous or notorious critic of abuses of Holocaust memory, who was very vocal in his criticism against the state of Israel, where he alleged that the state of Israel is abusing Holocaust memory for its public diplomacy. Unfortunately, Norman Finkelstein himself is a part of the problem. because he himself is guilty of using this kind of language, comparing Gaza to Warsaw Ghetto and things like that. Or, for example, this photograph is mine in 2010 when he was in Prague giving a public lecture. You could see behind him there is a projection, and on that projection there is a comparison between the victims of the Gaza bombing in 2009 and the victims of the Holocaust. So not even the famous author of the Holocaust industry is immune to that temptation. Next slide. I argue that Holocaust appropriation is in fact a part of a three-stage process, which we can call Holocaust inversion. Holocaust inversion can appear in three stages. In the first stage, we either deny or relativize or distort the memory of the Shoah in order to take it away from the actual victims. That's the step one. In the step two, we proclaim ourselves to be the actual victims. We appropriate, or we do it by appropriating the language and iconography of the Holocaust for ourselves. And in the step three, which is optional, but very often, but it is a very common occurrence, we accuse the Jews of committing that Holocaust against us. That's very, very common practice in anti-Semitic discourse these days. Next slide, please. I have selected two examples. One is from a left-wing side. One is from the right-wing side. This one is from the left wing, where you can see step number one, denial of the scope of the Holocaust by denying the existence of the gas chambers. Then the second step, by comparing the Israeli presence in Judea and Samaria to the Nazi project of Lebensraum. Then he comes to the third stage where he claims that the so-called Terezin Declaration about property restitution, about the restitution of Nazi stolen property should also include, quote, Palestinians and Native Americans. Don't ask me why Native Americans. Next slide. This one is from a right-wing website, quite an influential one with about 500,000 of monthly readers, very strongly affiliated with QAnon, which I'm not going to read this because it contains a very graphic depiction of this alleged crime and blood libel that are the Jews allegedly committing against the white nations. But the author alleges that while the Jews are committing these horrible acts of genocide, the victims are forced to bow to the Jewish Holocaust. So there you see the inversion in the language of the right-wing QAnon movements. Next slide. Enter the COVID-19 pandemic, which indeed was not exactly beneficial to civic liberties. And many of us were rightfully afraid that our civil liberties may be taken away with all the quarantines and lockdowns and COVID passes and mask mandates. And you know the drill. You live in Israel. You know what I'm talking about. So, of course, there were many fears in the society that there might be some kind of slippery slope towards some kind of totalitarianism. But, and next slide, there is another group which is trying to use these fears to instill its own agenda, to push it a little bit further. And these are all of my pictures from the various gatherings which took place in the streets of Prague, anti-vaxxer gatherings. So here, for example, we see the Prime Minister Andrej Babiš being compared to virus, but the word virus is written with SS, the logo of the Nazi Schutzstafeln. Next slide. Here, the health minister and the leading anti-pandemic expert in the Czech Republic during the pandemic were photoshopped to look like Nazis in images that were circulated online on a social media. Next slide, please. Here, when Slovakia decided that on its border checkpoints, where you had to show your COVID pass and things like that, it will create dedicate a fast lane for drivers who are vaccinated. The anti-vaxxer scene responded with these photoshopped images where they depicted this border checkpoint as a gateway to Auschwitz, with German inscription "Impfung macht frei," vaccination brings freedom, and yellow star of David for the non-vaccinated. Next slide. Here, stop COVID fascism with the yellow star of David again. Next slide, please. And in between that, you also saw the accusations that vaccine equals genocide. There is some kind of a sinister plot to commit a genocide against the humanity by means of a vaccine. Next slide. Some individuals have already faced criminal charges in my country for the crime of scaremongering, which is a crime according to the section 357 of the Czech Penal Code. This, for example, was a chairman she was a doctor, actually. That made the things even worse, and she was sending messages by email and on social media warning against vaccination Holocaust. Next slide.
This is Binek. Just note that you have 5 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. In the streets, you could see these people wearing prisoner garments, posing themselves as Jews, and yellow stars again. Next slide. And fortunately, that's the good news. The public backlash against these incidents was quite strong, not only from the Jewish institutions or Israeli embassy, but from the wider public, from the wider mainstream media, from the wider public and political elites. So the public condemnation this has raised was fortunately quite strong. So there are incidents, but there is also the immune response of the society. So that's the good news. Next slide. As an anthropologist, I could not but have noticed that some of the people who are using this kind of language usually already had some problem with the Holocaust in the first place. So, for example, the man who shared this image with the yellow star was actually before sentenced for several years of probation for Holocaust denial. Next slide. Or when this individual approached the Jewish community in Prague as a concerned citizen who is afraid that these anti-pandemic measures are like Nuremberg laws, when you explored his social media profile, next slide, you find that he has a very, very interesting taste in home decorations. With the Nazi Blutfahne in his office. Next slide. And at the same time, you could see these people wearing the prisoner garments as like prisoners of Auschwitz. But at the same time, on the same protest, you could see another people wearing signs such as "The government is fulfilling the plan of Rockefeller Foundation," which is an explicit anti-Semitic myth. Next slide. what is important about Holocaust appropriation and Holocaust inversion is that once you appropriated Holocaust for yourself and may pose yourself as the new Jew, you no longer cannot call the alleged perpetrators as Jews. So you look for other terms. You do it also to avoid prosecution, of course. So on the left-wing part of the spectrum, the word Zionist, for example, is very popular as a placeholder term. In the Russian media, in the pro-Russian media, the word Khazar is very important, is very popular, or also in the Arab media. In the right-wing part of the spectrum, such as in this book called The Great COVID Reset in the Form of Global Genocide, the word globalists is used to call these alleged Jewish conspirators. Next slide.
Zbigniew.
And we are coming to the end. I'm using this topic to show you, and you can scroll through the slides to show you the connection between this issue and the more broader issue of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jews and vaccination. Some of these images were coming from the neo-Nazi websites. And two last notes. The first note is that conspiracy myths about Jews and vaccination are nothing new. The last pogrom on the Czechoslovak territory took place in September 1945, and it was instigated by rumors about Jews and vaccination. And the second note is that anti-Semitism tends to develop more quickly than our legal and academic definitions of it. If you struggle to, or if you're writing some kind of a report, you may encounter a problem that this problem of Holocaust appropriation may not be fully covered by the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, for example. So for that purpose, I refer you to the other working definition, the so-called IRA working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion, which in its recent update also includes specific sections which deal with this particular issue. And if you are a lawyer or an academic, they can help you to build your case. The time is limited. I have to end now. Thank you very much for your attention.
So our next speaker would be Dr. Yael Siman. Hello, Yael.
Shalom, Hili.
Hello. Yael, Dr. Siman wanted to be with us very much, but she is now in Mexico, so I hope we didn't wake you up too early. And so she was visiting Canada and couldn't come here, but thank you so much for doing this. Dr. Yael Siman has a PhD in political science from the University of Chicago. She is the academic coordinator of the graduate program in social and political science at Iberoamericana University, Mexico City. She teaches courses on the Holocaust, genocide, and mass displacement, and she is currently conducting two research projects. The first is on the migration and integration of Holocaust survivors to Mexico, and the second is about the mobilizations of families of victims of the disappeared persons in the context of state and non-state violence in Mexico. And Dr. Siman is also a research fellow at our Center for the Research and Study of Genocide. Dr. Siman will be talking now about Holocaust commemorations in Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hili. Just to make sure, I'm not going to share a PowerPoint. How long do I have, Hili?
You have between 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, excellent. You let me know when I need to finish. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, even if it's virtually. I did come last night back from Ottawa. I went to the Lessons and Legacies conference. So I will read because even though I do speak English, I have a very strong, heavy Mexican accent. It is commonly thought that the memory of the Holocaust developed in Mexico much later than in other countries in the Americas, such as the United States, Canada, or Argentina. But fear of forgetting the Holocaust had early expressions in Mexico. Although Holocaust survivors did not give testimony in a massive way until the 1980s and 1990s, their traumatic experience and their loss of loved ones was not completely silenced, neither in their homes nor in the public sphere. We can say that Jewish survivors in Mexico began to develop ways of remembering the Holocaust even before the war ended, but especially in its aftermath. The notion of forgetting reveals a narrative that affirms that the memory of the Holocaust emerged until the 1960s with the Eichmann case, that it was a judicial process in Jerusalem against the Nazi perpetrator that allowed for the circulation and the recognition of the testimonies of the victims. Although it is true that the Eichmann case raised public interest in Latin America and can thus be regarded as a catalyzer of Holocaust memory, efforts to document, narrate, and commemorate the Holocaust by Jewish survivors in the region took place long before the Eichmann trial. In my analysis of Holocaust memory in Mexico, I consider three main moments. First, the early stage, which covers the period between the 1940s and the 1960s, when the commemorations of the Holocaust developed mainly within institutional spaces and cultural frameworks of the local Jewish community. Holocaust survivors at that point began to tell their stories and also created their first collective of implicated listeners. A second moment happened since the 1970s and until the 1990s, when the first Holocaust Museum in Mexico was created. Commemorations and collectives broadened to include Jewish victims of different experiences and geographies. And also in this period, two institutional projects of oral history were introduced. The first one actually was by the Institute of Contemporary Jewry at Hebrew U. And the second one, as you all know, it was the Shoah Foundation's project. The third moment includes the last 2 decades of the 21st century, when the regionalization and globalization of the Holocaust memory impacted Mexico in significant ways. It was then when the Memory and Tolerance Museum opened its doors to the public and commemorations became intertwined. This occurred in a national context of growing recognition of multiculturalism and a transition to democracy. In the early period in Mexico, both the Jewish and the national press circulated information about the Nazi crimes. I should mention here the work of Tamara Gleason, who has studied the Yiddish press in particular. In this early period, the Jewish community decided to commemorate the Holocaust as at a sacred place for the dead, the community's Ashkenazi cemetery. The artist was Yonia Fine, a Holocaust survivor himself with personal ties to Mexican muralists such as Diego Rivera. The mural focused on the theme of Ezekiel's bones, the bones that will rise again. There is limited information, unfortunately, about this memorial in Mexico, given that it was later destroyed. But some exchanges with members of the Jewish Mexican community reveal its symbolic significance at the time. Memoirs were also published throughout the 3 moments that I analyzed. We can point out, for example, as you probably know, the work of Transit by Anne Segers. She wrote it in the early 40s while she was a refugee in Mexico and was published first in Spanish and English. But there are other examples, such as the memoir of Masha Greenbaum, A Window to Hell, published in Mexico, or the testimonial work of Dunia Wasserstrom, including her published articles in the French and Mexican press, and later on her memoir, Never Again, published in the 1970s, and then again a second edition in the late 80s. Holocaust memory in Mexico has developed as a result of the intersections between local Jewish dynamics national processes of recognition of minorities, trans-regional collaborations, and international mediations. As part of the international context, for example, and it's, I mean, you know better than I know this because it's the resolution by the Knesset in 1951 to commemorate Yom HaShoah ve'Hagvura. All these references that were built in Israel traveled all the way to Mexico and became the key reference for Holocaust commemorations in the early period. So the symbol of the Warsaw Uprising is very much dominant in these commemorations. But it's also important to say that the commemorations in the community took place in a parallel way. The Ashkenazi community commemorated the Holocaust in its own community spaces, while the Sephardic community did its own commemorations. And maybe I should clarify that Mexico is a unique Jewish community in the sense that it's formed by 4 sub-ethnic communities, not only the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, but also the Halevi and the Shami, which trace their origins to Aleppo and Damascus. So the dominant narrative also during this first period was a narrative of uniqueness, as it happened in other places, that the Holocaust was unique, that it could not be compared, that it was a Jewish experience. But this has been changing over time. So I will take a leap a little bit so I can finish on time. But I wanted to mention also that in this early period, a cluster of survivors from ghettos and camps formed their first association. It's called, I translated it to English, Union of Members of the Resistance, Deported Persons and Victims of World War II. But in the beginning, they did not include, for example, victims that were hidden or refugees. Even today, when you talk to so-called refugees, they may tell you that they don't consider themselves survivors, even today. This organization was led by Dunia Wasserstrom, to whom I referred previously and who became a very important public figure in Mexico. Emmanuel Cahan has pointed out that in the case of Argentina, for example, it was not only the Eichmann trial, but also the Arab-Israeli wars of 1967 and 1973, which precipitated the national recognition of the survivors' voice in the country. Also in Argentina, a political usage of the Holocaust developed in relation to national processes. First, Peronism was equated to a form of Nazi fascism. Second, the Holocaust was a window to confront the painful past of the military dictatorship. In Mexico, in stark contrast to Argentina, I think, the Holocaust, even though it has detonated intersections between themes such as, on the one hand, the Holocaust, and on the other hand, intolerance, discrimination, and human rights violations, no political usage has been given to the Holocaust in a national context characterized by political violence. The Holocaust, I should say, is not part of the national curricula. It's not a main referent in our discussions about violence, crimes against humanity, and it has started to appear in some of the testimonies and literary works as a way to represent what's unrepresentable by language, but it's only really minor within the larger scope. And I'm going to take a leap now to the second period of the 80s and the 90s, just to mention that there was an important initiative to collect testimonies. As I said, this was done by Hebrew University in collaboration with local actors. It focused mainly on the experiences of immigrants, Jewish immigrants, but it included a group of 20 survivors. Am I okay, Hili, with time?
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And then also in this period, I think survivors started going more and more to schools and universities to share their stories, not only Jewish schools. And so the era of the witness, Bjorka's notion, also reached Mexico at the time. We can say, and I will try to conclude with the third moment of Holocaust memory, by the way, the commemorations during the second moment continued, and there was more inclusiveness, growing inclusiveness of, like I said initially, of victims, Jewish victims of other geographies and other experiences over time. And the third moment refers to the last 2 decades. And here we see an important regional and global processes. On the one hand, UNESCO has launched an initiative to bring together representatives of ministries of education in the region to promote the teaching of the Holocaust, but also commemorations, following, as you know, the UN's decision in 2005, and also, of course, the Stockholm resolution in 2000 to create the International Task Force, now IRA. I think what's important, and I will conclude with this, there have been other institutions participating. I can talk more about that later on. Recently, a project is ongoing regarding also the USC SHOAS Foundation Dimensions in Testimony, but regarding, I would like to conclude with the following. Although we see ramifications of the globalization of the Holocaust in Mexico, this memory, the argument would be, is nationally shaped. We can observe this in the 3 moments mentioned. We can observe this in our museums, our memorials, and our commemorations, our narratives, which all express the national historic and current context. As a general pattern, we have seen a change from a dominant narrative of uniqueness to a more universal one that makes connections with local realities of intolerance and discrimination. A second pattern is the moving away from closed and parallel commemorations to public and plural ones. And finally, a growing number of international organizations that support the endeavor of memory entrepreneurs in Mexico, while transregional collaborations have also developed. I think I should stop here, Hilly, to be respectful.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, our last but not least, as we say, is Reverend Dr. Hab Waldemar Szczerbiński. And Reverend Waldemar Szczerbiński is Associate Professor, MAU, works at the Institute of European Culture at Adam Mickiewicz University of Poznan. The scope of his courses include history of philosophy, philosophy of God, metaphysics, Jewish studies, Judaism and Christian Jewish dialogue. From 1999 to 2006, he has been a secretary of the Council of the Polish Episcopate Commission for Interreligious Dialogue and the Commission for Dialogue with Judaism. He is author of A.J. Heschel's Philosophy of Man and more books. I'm sorry, the recent one was Reconstructionist, this Declaration of Judaism in 2021 that was published in Polish. Doctors Szczerbiński lecture here is titled "Some Are Guilty, but All Are Responsible," referring to A.J. Heschel's opposition to all forms of persecution. Please welcome.
First of all, thank you for the idea to organize this conference. And Nita, I know the Shabbat was started half an hour ago, and we still with us before of the conference. Admire you. When asked how Jews respond to tragedy of the war in Ukraine and how they help, Michael Shudrich, the chief rabbi of Poland, replied, "It is about helping Jewish refugees, but we feel equally responsible for the non-Jewish refugees as well. Here in Poland, and in the efforts of our Jewish communities, I often experience this in a very tangible way. When anyone asks our help, we help them. Most of those who approach us and require support are Jewish, but there are also others who turn to us and receive the same extent of help. Now is not the time to make any distinctions." Similar words were spoken in a slightly different context by Abraham Joshua Heschel, for whom suffering or persecution of any kind is not exclusive to any person, any religion, any gender, any race or color. Hence, our deliberations here will attempt to show how racism was construed as a source of persecution in the thought of Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the greatest contemporary Jewish thinkers. The rabbi opted for a multifaceted approach, as his insights spanned elements which were universal and individual, cultural and religious, Judaic and monotheistic in the same time. Heschel found a point of reference not only the tragic history of anti-Semitism, but also drew on personal experience. He was the only survivor of his entire family and was unable to forget the horror of his last months of life in Germany and Poland. He was invariably aware of the extermination of millions of Jews who died in concentration camps for racial reasons, simply because they were Jews. This memory remained vivid even 25 years later, as evidenced by the words he said during the official meetings. He said, "I speak as a person who was able to leave Warsaw, the city in which I was born, just 6 weeks before the disaster began. My destination was New York. It would have been Auschwitz or Treblinka. I am a brand plucked from the fire in which my people were burned to death. I am a brand plucked from the fire of an altar of Satan, on which millions of human lives were exterminated to evil's greater glory, and on which so much ill was consumed, a divine image of so many human beings, many people's faith in God, and much of the secret and power of the attachment of the Bible bred and cherished in the hearts of men for nearly 2,000 years. Every step of the way, Heschel fought against racism as such, of which anti-Semitism was a manifestation. His commitment to combating all forms of racism, which he believed to be a major source of persecution, was not confined to issues involving Jews. He became defender and advocate of all those wrong in America and beyond. His prophetic outcry against racism, against US involvement in the war in Southwest Asia, his pleas to help Jews persecuted in Russia and aid Israel against imminent annihilation, his appeals of behalf of the hungry and persecuted around the world derived from the profound identification with those who need support and help. He would meet Martin Luther King, the leader of the anti-racist movement, of many occasions, walking alongside the later in the famous Selma protest march in 1965. The problem of strangers is universal, we know, affecting every person and every community. It is encountered in interpersonal, international, and interreligious relations with either object, phenomena, or people being strange or other. In the case of human persons, everything that is not them or theirs, they appear alien. The most significant marker of the position of the stranger is the fact that he or she does not originally belong to a particular group, familial, tribal, national, social, religious, cultural. And by entering its spheres, they introduce qualities which are not indigenous to the self-determination and self-awareness of the individual and community. This gives rise to a new situation in which there occurs a clash between what is one's own and what is foreign, old and new. The unity of proximity and distance, which is inherent to every interpersonal relationship, is constantly being modified, but the opposition, close, distant, always engenders attention. Thus, a stranger may become close, and one's own may turn out to be distant. In general, however, the distance either increases or decreases, accompanied by a change in the modes of social coexistence. In our discussion, the aim is to show how race-related persecution of Christian by Christian along the lines of us versus us was interpreted in the light of Heschel's religious concept of equality. His analysis of the issue revolved around the persecution of Black persons by followers of monotheistic religions in the United States, both Jews and Christians. This is because he believed the rashes either demonstrated or tolerated by people who believe in God is primarily a religious problem. He possessed a fundamental question. How can a religious person persecute another person because of a skin color? After all, a paradox occurs when a Catholic persecutes a Catholic and a Baptist persecutes a Baptist based on a race alone. In such circumstances, one's own becomes a stranger and the close becomes this distance. Heschel lived most of his life in America, where he saw active rashes among the children of one God. Segregation in general was beyond the rabbi's understanding in any case, but he was horrified by such segregation in religious communities, where special sectors in churches were designated for people of color, where Blacks were not admitted to the seminaries of the clergy, where followers of the same religion could not even visit each other in their homes. During Heschel's lifetime, rashes among religious Americans was a fairly widespread phenomenon, although his situation has greatly improved since the issue, it has not disappeared. The Baptist church, where Martin Luther King was pastor, is still active, but its parishioners are exclusively Black. Although whites and Blacks in Montgomery share the name of Baptists, they do not pray together. They do not live in the same neighborhoods. To this day, Black Christians in the United States feel inferior to their white brothers and sisters in faith, and moreover, have little trust in the white priests or pastors. There is only one Black Baptist church in New York with a white minister, but he was only accepted by the community when it was acknowledged that he sings like a Black man. Rashes as such is evil, but rashes of believers and between believers is very opposite of faith in Heschel's eyes. And yet, racial persecution is an undeniable fact in religious communities. Heschel emphasizes the rashes and religion are two mutually exclusive realities, as religion must unite the divided and consider all people children of the one God. Meanwhile, Russia divides people and denies some the dignity of God's children. Any attempt to link religion and Russia should thus provoke remorse. There is no doubt whatsoever the Russians as a doctrine with its hierarchy and values and conduct is worse than idolatry. He said, Russia is Satanist, unmitigated evil. The very assumption that the whites and people of color have different gods, or the supposition that the relationship between the one God and whites is different than it is the case with the people of color, is tantamount to erecting idols. Any God who is mine, but not yours, any God concerned with me, but not with you, is an idol. Heschel is most disturbed by the fact that the few among the believers realize the racism is a widespread and radical phenomenon. Supreme hatred backed by a paltry reason, a myth set that must be deemed the greatest threat to humanity. Hence the conviction that there is no third option as far as resolving the issue is concerned. The choice is a fundamental one, religion or race. You cannot worship God and at the same time look at man as if he were a horse. To underscore the importance of this fundamental option, the Jewish thinker cites Christian theologian Niebuhr. Race prejudice, a universal human element, is the most recalcitrant aspect of the evil in man, a treacherous denial of the existence of God. For the believer, the Bible, on which Heschel draws in his reflections, is the super authority. He identifies Russia with the civilization of death, which he sets against the civilization of life. Paraphrasing Moses, he asserts, I call heaven and earth to witness against you to this day. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. Russia is both blasphemy and a curse. While the idea of equality is not and cannot be subject to any speculation or skepticism. Racial equality of all human beings follows directly from the act of creation and manifests God's design. Its negation demonstrates betrayal of God's will. On the grounds of his conviction, Heschel recognized the religious imperative of equality. Meanwhile, observation of the actual state of affairs reveals that in believers' religious communities do not always feel a kinship with all people. Too often, they make their attitude towards other contingent on the color of their skin. Simply being black makes one a stranger. Racial prejudice is an abomination of God, especially if it stems from the heart of a person who prays and participates in the worship of God in the same time. For Heschel, racism is not only sin against another human being, but also against God himself. Thus, the problem is not only how to do justice to the colored people, it is also how to stop the profanation of God's name by dishonoring the Negro's name. A white person who considers themselves religious must seek liberation from the mass contempt of the Black person. Quoting by the Bible, the American rabbi reminds one that God himself is the witness to all oppression. The existential
Justice.
remoteness of the white and black communities and the separation of one from the other is, according to Heschel, a glaring manifestation of racism. For the sake of peace of mind, whites want nothing to do with blacks. The Jewish thinker quotes from an article in the Christian Century, the newspaper, yeah? The Goethization of the Negro in American society increasing. 3 million Negroes, roughly 1/6 of the nation's Negro population, are now congested in 5 of the greatest metropolitan centers of the North. The
Excuse me,
alienation of the Negro
Dr.
from
Reverend.
the mainstream of
That's right.
America life proceeds space. The Negro discovering to his sorrow that the mobility which he gained in the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13 and 14 amendments of the Constitution nearly 100 years ago merely enables him to move from one ghetto to another. Heschel notes that racism in America is sustained and tolerated within religious communities due to widespread notion that the situation of blacks is justified and relative to the past, much better. Slavery was abolished while the material and social standing of blacks are changed for the better. Revolutionary changes have already been made in the domain of civil rights, and the attitude of blacks themselves is to blame for the persisting inequality. Whites have done what they could. According to Heschel, however, whites have only taken the first step. Love of one's neighbor arising from the faith demands total equality. In the
Please,
context,
Professor, try to wrap up.
Okay, let me see just one sentence, yeah?
I'm sorry.
Racial persecution is nothing defiance against the commandment of charity. We are accountable to God for practicing charity, and we will be brought to account by God for it. In the eyes of the Creator, we are all equal. It is not the society which grants inalienable rights to person, nor does the equality of all human beings stem from human innocence or virtue. Human equality is the result of God's love and commitment binding on all human beings. The equality of all human beings has its foundation in God himself. Religious leaders should constantly remind their congregations of the truth that some are guilty, but all are responsible. Innocence in the eyes of the law does not mean innocence before God. Racism is a sin and leads to persecution. Fighting racism is an obligation arising from faith in the Creator of the world, who has called the human beings into existence as equal. God needs human beings here and now. The universe is done. The greater masterpiece still undone, still in the process of being created, is history. For accomplishing his grand design, God needs the help of man. Man is and has the instrument of God, which he may or may not use in consonance with the great design. Racism, with its various forms and verifying scope, continues to challenge all religions in the modern world. Is Judaism, is Christianity ready to face the challenge? Heschel inquires, the most important problem facing religions is not to purify of faith, but rising to the test given by God and meeting his expectations. Christian and adherents of Judaism alike should be afraid less distancing oneself from the other drives from farther away from God himself. This is what racial persecution entails. We cannot remedy this together and only together because no religion is an island. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have some time for questions, and also I want to leave a couple of minutes, maybe 10 or something like that, to make some concluding remarks. I would like to say something. I would like to have you say some concluding remarks of the conference. We still have another panel of students, the students that have worked for the establishment of the research center, students from here and students from Liberty University. It would be an online panel. If you would like, you're welcome to stay. So yeah, let's have some questions and then we'll have the concluding remarks. So who would like to begin? Yes.
For all the speakers, since we have limited time, it seems to me that we have a dialogue about the importance of words. Words matter. The definition of words are very important. So in the analysis of narratives, discourses, you have talked, for example, about races, very important understanding of why that is one of the worst forms of political evil. And then in another presentation, there was an analysis of how there are efforts to deconstruct the meaning of the Holocaust by all kinds of political ideologies from the right and from the left, diminishing the historical importance of the Holocaust. And then we have another presentation that focused on a very racist culture, the Mexican culture, that has not recognized the genocide of the indigenous communities, that is trying to make efforts right now, obviously, to recognize the historical setting, the importance of the Holocaust. Right, and so my question will be, considering all these elements, what kind of discourse that transcends political ideologies, in essence, is it even possible to build up a narrative, a discourse that focuses on issues of justice from an objective perspective, which will enable human rights advocates around the world to precisely try to do what you have tried to do today, which is transcend right-wing, left-wing politics in your analysis of very important topics. If it is possible to build up that kind of discourse in the 21st century, which it seems to me it's just a continuation of the efforts of the discourse of universal human rights, perhaps, or it is another language that will enable human rights advocates, pro-democracy movements to build up a discourse that will neutralize, that will stop these efforts to deconstruct concepts such as racism, concepts such as the Holocaust, or in the Latin American context, the denial of the genocide of indigenous communities. So what kind of language will serve to transcend political narratives, right-wing or left-wing narratives, to achieve the objectives of justice in different societies and in essence, as an instrument to promote the defense of human dignity around the world?
Yeah, no, maybe we'll take a couple, okay? And then you'll answer. Does anybody? Yes.
I've enjoyed all of your contributions. Thank you so much. It's been an honor and delight to be with you all. I wonder if the fusion of church and state historically has led to the glorification and idolization of a particular culture and the ability to abuse other cultures, because the people that, oh yes. The question of fusion of church and state is maybe an idolization of a prevailing culture, which allows one culture to infringe upon others, and then we have genocide. I wonder that's one theme that I'm going to be left processing. Would love to hear comments from anybody on that. And
I also feel the fascism and the accusations of Nazism in the United States has been so prevalent on the left and the right. We saw some examples of that. And it's just very striking. I don't know if I have an easy classification of that, but it's been very prevalent even in these most recent elections. So it's confounding and concerning. So welcome anybody to comment on that. Thank you very much.
Any other question?
Just a comment. Kind of agreeing with what everybody said, and thanks to the speakers, I mean, for waking up so early to join. And this has been very thought-provoking for me, especially, and I want to be able to leave with something that we can come back to sometime. I don't know where, but can happen, but maybe someone here does it. But my thought process right now is something needs to follow up, not just the words, because we can be held accountable for using words we don't act on. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Would you like to answer now? Let's do it in a reverse way. So Professor Sterbinsky, Dr. Sterbinsky.
I know how what are you trying to ask me, yeah, but I have no answer, but Heschel had. First step, what we should to do, we have to rebuild, not build, rebuild good anthropology, because this is the starting point for another ideas, you know. Because according to him, everything what is going on and is wrong is because the human beings lost the sense of transcendence. You know, whatever we think about God, Allah, you know, Yahweh, whatever, without the sense of transcendence, according to Heschel, we can save, you know, the word of values. Yeah, without values, the people are, especially any community, is not able to exist. This is why we have so many ideas how to resolve the problems, but we try to resolve the problems in the not in the light of transcendence. Okay, we try to stay in immanent world. According to him, it is the wrong way. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, El.
Thank you, Hilly. First of all, I wanted to say that it's not that early. Don't worry. I started at 8:30 a.m., so it's okay. And then, but thank you for your acknowledgement of that. And secondly, since I missed the previous days of the conference, it's hard to me to engage with the larger conversation. However, I would like to say that regarding the first question, thank you about including Mexico in your question. I would nuance a little bit the affirmation of Mexico being a racist country. I would say that Mexico is a country with racist structures, legacies, political elites, and sectors of society. But that is a country with racism, but I'm not sure I would say today it's just a racist country. So, and in that sense, I think there has been an important push for interculturality, both at the educational level, at the memory building level. So you can see I didn't have enough time to go in depth into the commemorations, but you can see like in the past decade, we have more and more actors from society participating in this public commemoration, and that creates a space for dialogue, for encounters, for dialogue, for having different types of conversations around the Holocaust, but also around other interconnected themes. And lastly, I wanted to say, I guess you refer, when you say genocide, you refer to the Spanish Spanish conquest. I think you're referring to that period. We've had, of course, other periods of violence against indigenous people. I'm not sure we can call it genocide. We've had all periods of political violence. We have now crimes against humanity. I mentioned, Hilly mentioned my work on the disappeared. As you probably know, there's over 100,000 persons disappeared according to official records. We think it's many more. But I think, and to end, that of course we need words, discourses that I think are historically grounded, that recognize nuances, that recognize complexities and build on interculturality. But definitely, and I appreciate the last comment, we also need actions. And I think we're doing a lot in our spaces of work, of daily life, I think, regarding educating in that sense, with the nuances, the complexities, the multiple perspective, and without diluting. I think we can have histories conversing with each other, but without diluting their specificities. Thank you, Hilly.
Thank you. Dr. Zbinek.
Thank you for the question. I think only one of the questions actually went after me, and that is the question of the narrative, which I'm afraid is a little bit too broad to be really sufficiently answered in a couple of sentences in an improvised fashion in several minutes. But do not despair. There are some solutions. One thing I would like to point you to definitely is the websites of International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, which have recently launched a project to specifically counter the issue of Holocaust distortion and appropriation. And these are materials specifically aimed at teachers and policymakers and things like that. So you might find your narrative that you're looking for in these materials. In general, my approach, my strategy is always in 3 stages: educate, intervene, prosecute. Educate as long as it's possible. Education is important. If education fails, if there is some kind of incidents do happen. People do make mistakes. Intervene. Be patient with the people. People sometimes do make mistakes. Intervene. Do not be afraid to sometimes even hire PR agencies, for example, which are good at crisis communications. If the incident is more serious, there is quite a good practice with that in Czechia, for example, in the issue of cemetery disputes. So intervene. Do not be afraid to ask for help from professionals in crisis communications if that is necessary. If that fails, prosecute. Do not be afraid. There are laws in many European countries. There are laws which specifically prohibit and target Holocaust denial, but also, for example, Austria, just 2 days ago, there is a proposal of amendment of the legislation regarding Holocaust denial to also include cases of Holocaust distortion, such as the cases of the yellow badges in anti-vaxxer protests. So this is something very new, and this comes from the philosophy which was formulated in the Germanic-speaking countries after World War II of the right. It's called fighting democracy. The right of democracy to defend itself. The democracy has the right, in order to protect itself, to use even prosecution or violence, because democracy is in the benefit of the majority of the society. So it must have some kind of tools at its disposal to defend itself. This was very important political philosophy or strategy, which played important role in the process of denazification in Germany. So educate, intervene, or prosecute if everything else fails. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. As I said, I would like to say some concluding words, and then I would very much love to hear anything that you have to say about this conference. So it's a shame. I'm sorry that Nitsa left, but I wanted to say at first, thank you very much to Professor Nitsa Davidovich and to Dr. Eyal Lewin, who have worked with me almost a year, maybe more than a year, I can't remember, on putting on this conference. As I said in the opening of the conference, we have many things that we wanted to include and we couldn't include, and still we had a very intensive, I think, almost 3 days. Again, thank you, a huge thank you to these two amazing people. I couldn't have done that alone. I think that in these days, of course, we have not fully covered all of the aspects that are related to the discussions about genocide and the Holocaust. I think we have managed to think about and raise many difficult questions that should be investigated more and should be learned more and should be discussed, hopefully in conference, in forthcoming conferences. I'm not going to organize it. Maybe I will. I think we saw that although the legal concept of genocide has been established in the mid 20th century, the ideas, the concept, the basic concept of genocide can be traced back to ancient history, can be traced back to the Bible, to the Holy Scripture, and of course the prohibition on genocide and human rights values that are related to it. I think we also managed to think about how the concept of transitional justice that we discussed yesterday is relevant and is important for reconciliation between perpetrators and victims to rebuild societies. We have also understood, I think, the uniqueness of the Holocaust, and yet I think we have managed to see how it should not be disengaged from the discussions of genocide. But we still have differences on this point. Maybe Nitsa would like to say something about that. We had some academic arguments about this. And I think the arguments have been present here. How is the Holocaust distinguished? It should be distinguished, but should not it be included in a more inclusive discussion about genocide in general? So I think all of these questions have been raised, and I hope we will continue to discuss them. I hope we will continue. I hope that our discussions will encourage other people to act on it. If we're not human rights activists, I don't think we should blame ourselves for not being. We are doing one thing in the academia. Maybe it will be, taken to other directions by other people. So now I would like to hear anything you have to say. Nitsa, you want to say something, or later on? Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I think there are few conferences in the world where we have a small number of scholars, of people from different perspectives that can address such important issues for humankind. We are witnessing right now a war of aggression, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, in which innocent human beings are dying, children, women, men, where there are crimes against humanity. war crimes. All this is very real. And I think in these days, we have reflected on the history of the Jewish community in a way that at least for me, was very powerful, that has once again encouraged me to continue to be in this field, in the study of international human rights law, but also as a human being to understand the strength, the suffering of the Jewish community, the victory of the Jewish community, and the fact that we need to understand each other better. So in that context, I think that although we come from different religious traditions, different ethnic backgrounds, different perspectives, I think we have shared a common concern about the future of humankind. And we have tried to address very, very important and difficult issues. And I think that this provides us with a platform to continue to work together. Some of us from a Judeo-Christian perspectives, others from different perspectives, Christian and others. And so we obviously once again thank you for organizing this conference at Ariel University, and thank you for not only focusing on the academic aspect, but also the power of narratives, of art, literature, the fact that this is not only about philosophy or theology, it is about art. So I think that was a very important component of this conference, the power of art. And the reality is that because these are difficult issues regarding the problem of political evil, not many people want to focus on this. Yet, the future of humankind, in essence, the peaceful coexistence of sovereign states and peoples depends on the capacity of sovereign states to resolve their international disputes by peaceful means rather than by war. And I think that's another lesson that we have learned these days, that we have discussed. And so in that context, I just would like to continue our dialogue, because I think just is the beginning of this, and to continue to reflect on how we can make this world a better place to live for all of us, for all humanity. So thank you very much for hosting us in this conference.
Thank you. Yes.
Just a small comment, since you mentioned the Bible as one of the sources of anti-genocide thinking, I think that there is an indication in the Bible which justifies genocide just to one ethnic group, which is the Amaleks. There is an order to get rid of all Amaleks from the world.
I think we have discussed it yesterday, or you have, yeah, but you have given a different perspective about that. Yeah.
But my perspective is that from the positive fact that we should get rid of the Amaleks, it means that there is no right, there is no justification to get rid or for a genocide to any other ethnic group. And if you try to think who are those that came after the Amaleks, you can't find them anywhere in the world, even not within the Muslims or the Iranians, maybe just the Nazis.
Yes, Nita.
Okay. I think that from my point of view, this conference is very unique because it's interdisciplinary, religious, history, lots of things. And I can say that from my point of view, the key is education. Maybe in the next.
No, I mean, we agreed about that all the time. We said that law doesn't solve all problems, and the narratives are different, but the only discipline that can unite or make any reconciliation between the discourses is education.
And I have mentioned those three stages: educate, intervene. Yes. Thank you. I'm a good teacher. And prosecute. Educate. If education fails, intervene, explain, but be patient. But even if that fails, prosecute.
Okay. So thank you very. Thank you. Yes, I think so. And I said how hard the three of us worked during this year. And I hope we will continue to work, and you're all welcome to join and bring us ideas and also hold on more conferences. Thank you so much. Yes. Yes.